the Extension Agriculture Institute, your connection to the latest agriculture and horticulture research from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
This is the 3-point mounted rototiller, and you can see it's connected to the tractor on a 3-point hitch. 1, 2 bottom links, 3 top link. And the top link is adjustable up and down. You can suck this in or lengthen it out, and what it will do is change the angle of the tiller into the ground. And right now, if you look, it's mostly flat. Good place to start is having the angle so it's mostly flat to the ground. These are the sway bars, and you can loosen or tighten them. Usually it's nice to have a little bit of play so that the rototiller can move a little bit if it hits a stone or something, but you want them mostly tight so that the rototiller isn't swaying all over. Now that these are tight, the rototiller stays tight to the tractor and will follow straight ahead. In terms of power, this is the PTO, the power takeoff of the tractor. This is the PTO shaft. These springs here where the PTO attaches to the gearbox is called a PTO clutch, and it's to save your tractor. For example, if the rototiller is spinning and the tines hit a hard rock and they have to stop, if that is transferred through the power takeoff to your tractor, it can hurt the inside where that power takeoff shaft is. And this slip clutch, if the tine stops suddenly, it will let the PTO shaft continue to move. So when you see springs like this, it means you have a slip clutch, and it's a nice thing to have on your PTO powered implements to protect your tractor if you hit a stone. This is the first gearbox. It transfers the power coming in from the tractor this way. You'll want to make sure that the gearbox always has oil, gear lube. So here's the bolt here that would come off to add oil. And if you look over here, you can see that over time, this blackness, there's some of the oil leaking out. That's okay, it's not too much, but a few times a season you want to check the level of this oil and make sure that the gears have oil in them. This is the second gearbox. The power comes from here on the shaft and turns a gear right here. And there's another gear here that's connected to the tines, and there's a chain here that turns. That chain needs oil to stay lubricated. Here in the top, this nut would come off, and this is where you add oil to the gear case here. This is the information where you would find the serial number of the machine. So here you can see it's made by Befco. You can see the model number, and you can see the serial number. When you have this information, if you're buying a machine used, you can call up the company and learn how much it costs for repair parts. You can get spare parts, and you can ask them questions like, will that rototiller work with your tractor, with the horsepower of your tractor? But you'll want that model or serial number with the manufacturer to get that information. Here you can see the skid shoe, and this allows you to set the depth of the tines into the soil. This nut right here can be loosened, and you can see the farmer has this set all the way up as high as it will go so that the tines can sink into the soil. If you wanted to till more shallowly, you could loosen this nut and lower this down, and it would hold the tines further out of the soil. And there's a skid shoe on this side and a skid shoe on the other side so that the machine is balanced. So here's the side gearbox, and you can see right here some of that gear lube, some of that oil is leaking out, and that's normal over time. But just to say, some of it will be leaking out, and so you want to be checking the oil level a few times through the season to make sure that you always have oil in the gearbox. Here's the rear shield, and it can be lowered down, or with this chain here, it can be put up and tied up. When you're tilling, if you want a very fine tilth, small pieces of soil, you can keep the rear flap down, and so as soil is being chewed up by the tines, it is put back into the tines by the shield and gets chewed up even more. Sometimes you might want the shield up. If there's a lot of residue on the soil, it can catch in the tine and get caught up in the tines. And when you have the shield up, that residue can throw out the back. So there's sometimes where you want the shield up and sometimes when you want the shield down. Here the shield is down. If I want to put it up, I can take the chain and hook it on a link right here to hold it up. These are the tines. This is a forward rotating machine, so the tines rotate forward. And you can see here's the front edge is beveled, it's sharpened, and you can see here the back edge is thicker. These tines are pretty worn. Right here is where they used to be, so the tine used to be at this level, but they've been worn down over the last 7 years here. Sometimes you'll want to replace your tines. You can order a new set or just a few, and you can see these nuts and bolts here on the flange. And these nuts and bolts are what you would remove, take this tine out, and put a new tine in. So here you can see is the front of the tine that's beveled, it's sharpened, and here's the back, and you can see how it's worn down. This is the original level that the tine used to be, and over the last 7 years it's worn down, and you can see there's more of a gap in between both of these tines because they've been worn down. So these tines would be ready to change. Here you can see some of the weeds that got caught up on the shaft. These are not the biggest problem, but you can get a lot of residue wrapped around the shaft. And so it's good to either mow very short before you use the rototiller or not to have too much residue on the surface. When you have too much, it will get caught over the entire shaft and you'll have to stop and clean out the residue from the whole shaft. This is the bearing that the shaft sits on. There's one on this side and one on the other side. Sometimes things can build up here, like dirt or grass or other things, so it's good to clean that out. And now you can see the bearing right there. Sometimes if the rototiller hits a big stone or stops suddenly, this bearing can go bad. And if it does, what you'll see is maybe oil leaking out from the gearbox, or you'll hear crunching and rubbing of metal. And that's the bearing here. There's two bearings, one on this side of the shaft and one on the other side of the shaft. So here we've got the shaft and here's the bearing on the other side. You can see that a lot of residue and straw and string has built up here on this bearing. And it's good to take that out periodically so to protect the bearing. You don't want a lot of that to build up. And so if I start pulling that off, you'll be able to see the bearing better. And you can also see how it builds up like that as it wraps around. Here you can use a knife or a piece of wire to scrape away at that. So I'll just keep scraping away. There we go. So we got a lot of that residue out and you can see the shaft clearly going into the bearing right there. So here we have the shaft, the bearing on this side, and here's the outside of that bearing. And you can see here's a grease zerk, and this needs to be greased. So I'm gonna clean the dirt off of there, and you can put your grease gun right on there to keep that bearing greased. So places on the rototiller that need lubrication, here's the front of the PTO shaft. That will need grease from a grease gun. Here's the back of the PTO shaft. That will need grease from a grease gun. Here's the first gearbox. You can see it has oil coming out. This needs gear oil filled up right here. Here's the second gearbox, and it needs gear oil right there. And here's the second bearing opposite the second gearbox, and it needs grease, a grease gun right there. This is a weld where two pieces of metal were joined together at the factory. And if you're buying a machine used, look at the welds and make sure that they're new. Sometimes when a machine breaks, people will fix it, and you want to make sure that they did a good job. Otherwise, the machine might break again. So this weld is continuous. There's no holes in it, and I see that it goes all the way around. So this is a weld that was made at the factory, and it looks good. So here are all the tines. When you're buying a machine used, look underneath at the tines. Make sure they're all there. I don't see any missing tines here. And look and see what kind of shape they're in. Buying all new tines can cost $400 to $600 for all new tines, and that's more money. So check and see. These ones are worn, but they're all there. And check and see if there's any broken ones. For example, this one here on the edge is broken off, and so that might want to get replaced.